here today, or one of the small reasons I should say that we're here today, is that I am actually the last remaining bloodline for Stamford Raffles, Sir Stamford Raffles. So my name is Stamford instead of Stamford. When we had the opportunity to work with this brand, it was not just because of the emotional family connection, it was truly because of extraordinary, iconic hotel and something that we can celebrate and will be around for many years to come. This is a celebration of 100 years of arguably the world's most famous gin cocktail, certainly up there. And we have taken the responsibility from Raffles to make sure that through meticulous craftsmanship of this gin, the Singapore Sling and other spirituous drinks that can be found in these great hotels live on for another century. The brief originally came to Sipsmith that could we make a gin that could have been found 100 years ago and would have been made with Singapore Sling. Jared, when I reported this brief back to him, was very, very quick to say no. Absolutely, we will not. I like the idea that they've come up with, but in practice, of course, it's totally practical, because 100 years ago, Britain was at war. And there was, in fact, rations on the wheat that was available, and there were all sorts of different adjuncts that were used in the distillation of gin that you would never consider to be made up of a quality gin today. So instead, Jared, through me, asked Peter and Diana whether or not it would be okay if we created a gin that could in fact be inspired by the Malay Basin and represent everything that Raffles is today and would like to be in the future, that also harnesses everything that Sipsmith is about. And I know Jared is going to talk us through very briefly in a minute the botanicals, as well as walk us through the tasting. But just before we do, I thought I'd just share a tiny story on Sipsmith without going into the depth. I hope you'll stick around for a few more drinks and I can walk you through our three ladies here. We have prudence on the end, constance in the middle, and patience. And they're all three words that I think well sum up the way that we treat how we make things here. And we really believe that we do things the right way. When Fairfax and I set up the business 6 years ago, it was a lot longer than that, 6 years ago, we were trying to solve a problem about how other gin people, other brands, not just in gin, were actually making it behind closed doors. They were not making it the way it always used to be made, nor perhaps as far as we were concerned, the way it really should be made. And inspired by this movement of craft and authenticity and transparency, where you showcase everything that you do, and you're accredited against that and recorded against that, we set forward to make gin the way that gin always used to be. And so we built the first distillery since 1920, so nearly 200 years. No, it is, sorry, 200 years. It's a bloody good drink. I got my own punchline wrong. Sipsmith is the first distillery in London for nearly 200 years, the capital of gin here in London, and we have pioneered this movement of craft distilleries that exist now in not just England but in Europe and beyond these shores, and we really do stand for making things the right way, which is why the affiliation with Raffles just seems to make so much sense. It's an emotive story, of course, with my family connection, but also it just means a great deal to us. And as far as Sipsmith's brand will go, this will be a really exciting tide mark in our journey through time, as we hope that people will also look back at Sipsmith in 100 years' time, and this little mark will be charted on our journey too. So it's been an exciting journey. It's great to have you down here, but probably best we hear from the actual master craftsman himself, Jared Brown, who we were very fortunate enough to have had join our journey and talk us through the Raffles gin and the Singapore Sling, I guess, too. That's really what's brought us all together.
Thanks. That was where it began, was looking at the Singapore Sling and realizing that to make a Singapore Sling as it would have been made in 1915, we had to start by making the gin and exploring this idea of a gin produced likely in Jakarta, working with botanicals from the Malay Basin, as well as some of the traditional gin botanicals. We tasked ourselves with not just making an interesting gin, that would be too easy. We wanted to make a traditional London dry, as they would have tried to do. They would have taken this much further than just putting it together. They would have gotten it right. We pride ourselves here in doing that as well. That's where the word smith comes in Sipsmith, is being a smith or a craftsman. So we began a search for botanicals. For citrus, we moved over to pomelo, beautiful flavor from that, and then kaffir lime leaf, and nutmeg, mace, cardamom. I'm not going to run through all of them. You can have a look at the table over here and have a look at them. I invite you to have a taste straight of this gin. It is a very traditional London dry, but then there's a lusciousness to it, a voluptuousness underlying that to me makes it a beautifully mixable gin, and also to me perfect for the Singapore sling. The Singapore sling itself evolved from a gin sling, a drink that was brought by ferry. Forgive me, I left Barcelona just hours before getting here, and I've lost the name of the port that this drink sailed from. But the first record I found of gin sling being consumed in Singapore was around 1908. By 1915, when it reached Raffles, what the bartender there did was he made the best gin sling in Singapore. And it became the Singapore sling from there. It evolved extensively over the decades. I traced all of these different trends in flavors globally that also showed up in the evolution of the Singapore sling. If you look at the trends of the 60s and the 70s, the grenadine, the pineapple juice, etc., those became very prevalent. Big fruity drinks emerged, where the original Singapore sling was a smaller drink. It was very much like what you're having today, only the first was served in a highball glass. They had tried to get this drink at the cricket club in Singapore, but simply couldn't, except by sitting down and ordering a glass of gin, a glass of cherry brandy, a glass of Benedictine, a glass of lime juice, 2 glasses of ice, and a bottle of soda, and sitting down and putting it together themselves. And apparently they were discouraged from doing this. And I believe that's where Raffles stepped in and to the fore, to the rescue of these poor people who were desperate for a good sling.
It's just stunning, isn't it? And here we are, 100 years later.
It is amazing. Everything evolves.
Well, another step that I took as soon as I saw where this was going was I quickly, that first afternoon, I found a friend who was sitting in the long bar having a Singapore sling. I got them on Skype, and so I effectively sat in the long bar that afternoon. The next day, I found another friend who was sitting there. So I had the master distiller of Beefeater was sat at the bar the first day. The second day,
He's weeping today. He's weeping today.
a representative, oh no, he's also a huge fan of Sipsmith. A huge friend of, thank you. Then the next day was John Clay from Bulls Geneva, and then a friend from New York. And so I did this every day for 6 days. I sat at the long bar from my house in the Cotswolds.
So you missed the other 22,896.
I did.
Jenny, you've walked us through some of the ingredients that you've got in here, and everyone's invited, of course, just to look. The back run, the back 7 glasses on the table are the classic London dry gin botanicals. The forward 7 glasses are the Malay Basin spices that we've sourced. So, you know, we always say at Sipsmith where the old and the new meet, and the two get on really quite spectacularly well. The table in front of you is just a great example of that, and I know it's exactly what Raffles stand for too. So on the back, you've got the old school London Dry, and on the front and the fore, you've got some of those spices. And you should all now have a glass with you. Should we do a collective nosing and tasting?
When you bring the glass up to your nose, I will ask you to do one thing. Bring the glass up to your nose as normal, but please put your lips. I don't want you to breathe through your mouth. I don't want you to hold the glass to your mouth. Just like this. With your mouth open, and that allows the aromas to reach both the orthonasal, the front receptors, and swirl around the retronasal palate. So you will taste this, you'll taste the aroma as you smell it. And it's like listening to music with two speakers rather than just one. And so, with any traditional London Dry, it's juniper forward. There's soft pine, sweet citrus, that is the juniper. The next that comes up is the pomelo. Beautiful richness to that. And then the cardamom becomes very present. Warm spice.
It's strong, isn't it? It's soft. It's very soft.
You'll find as we taste this, the first thing that you realize is that we're tasting at room temperature, at full strength. It's warming, but it doesn't burn. That's because good spirits warm, bad spirits burn. We take a very narrow hard cut, and we pride ourselves in that, and we can prove it this way. There's no charcoal filtration or anything to clean this up. So this is, as it came off the still, just cut to bottling strength with London water. We don't reverse osmosis filter our water. We demineralize it a little bit so it doesn't etch the inside of the bottles anymore. So in the first batch, but it still carries the provenance, it still carries London.